So, official welcome now that we're recording. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the second of the new series of BU Masterclasses. My name is Andy. I'm from the international team of Bournemouth University, and I'm introducing today my colleague, Dr. Johnny Branney, henceforth known as Johnny for the rest of this session, who will be speaking to us today about all about pain. I'm also going to introduce you to Les Gelling, a colleague of Johnny's from the Faculty of Health and Social Science, who will be not taking part in the presentation, but will be helping to deal with the questions later on. So if you didn't hear before, we'd ask you to switch off your cameras for the duration of the presentation, and by all means switch those back on once we get to the question and answer session later on. The presentation itself will be recorded, but we'll stop recording when we come to the Q&A at the end of the presentation. For now, I'm going to hand over to Johnny. Thank you very much, Johnny, for joining us, and we look forward to hearing what you've got to say.
Excellent. Thank you, Andy, and thank you everyone for giving up a bit of your time this early evening. So my first technical challenge is just to share my screen with you, hopefully correctly, that you can see the presentation now. And so, like I say, welcome. And really, it's just a short presentation. And while I will be talking a bit, I will be asking you some questions as well. And you know, pain is something that affects all of us, most of us at some point in our lives. Hence maybe the reason some of you are here today is maybe because of personal experience with pain, or it's maybe because you're interested in it as a topic of study. It might relate to what you're already studying at uni or thinking about studying. Whatever your motivation for coming here today, I hope that everyone can get something out of it. We've only got a short amount of time together, so we can't obviously comprehensively answer what is ultimately a complex question to say what is pain. But however, I hope to be able to cover, give you at least two key messages to take home. One is that contrary to what this picture might indicate, which is suggesting this person has perhaps got some joint pain in shoulder, elbow or wrist there, that actually pain is in the brain. And we'll have a look at why that might be the case. And the second take-home point is that hurt does not always equal harm. And hopefully those two key points will come across with some of the illustrations we'll look at to guide what we're looking at. Okay, so I'm going to fire on, and the first thing I'm going to do is show you a picture. Okay, and I don't know if this is a picture that chimes with any of you. I certainly have trapped my fingers in when a window frame fell down on them, so can attest to how these characters are looking in this picture. It can be excruciatingly painful. So just to orientate you to this picture then, to explain why we should look at such a picture at all. We've got four individuals, an adult male, two women and a child, who've all experiencing the same injury, if you like, simultaneously. So the window's all crashing down on their fingers at the same time, and obviously not a highly unlikely event to occur in real life, but to illustrate a point of everybody receiving a same injury at the same time. You can see the windows, the glass is shattering and shards are flying through the air, perhaps contributing, hopefully not, but perhaps contributing to injury as well. And then you might see quite readily on their faces how they might be feeling. You're left in no doubt how some of them are feeling about this event. So my first question then to you is, what do you think about the pain that's perhaps being experienced by these four people? And I'm just going to orientate you to these potential options. Then hopefully we'll have a poll that Andy will share with us so you can answer the question yourself once we've looked through these options. So do you reckon that the pain experienced by the individual might be increased at a higher level depending on their age? So does it get increased as they age? And let's just say, for argument's sake, that the woman with the blue top is the oldest. We have then the male character second oldest, followed by the woman in the green dress, followed by the child. Mommy. So in other words, do you think the woman with the blue top might have the highest pain and the child the lowest pain? Do we think that pain might decrease with increased age? So in other words, is it the opposite? Is it the child who's experiencing the highest level of pain while the woman in the blue top experiencing the least? Is the male character experiencing the most pain? Do males experience more pain than women? Is it possible that all four are actually experiencing the same pain because they're all experiencing the same injury at the same time? Or do they all have different pain? Is each of the four people experiencing a different level of pain? So Andy, if you're able to can we put the poll up for this? Quite perfect, look at that. So you should be able to just answer this on your screen. Just for question 1, if you can see question 2, just ignore that for now. But for question 1, what answer fits most readily with your view of what's going on in that picture? And then just put your vote. And then if you can just hold yourself back from answering question 2, because we haven't actually looked at the picture for question 2 yet. Just question 1. So we've got 6 out of 50 have voted so far. So don't worry, this is anonymous voting. You're not going to be checked up on, and it's not about getting it correct or not. It's really about getting us to think about pain. We've got 8 out of 50 people now. So just go with your gut instinct. If you're not sure, just go with the first answer that pops into your head. But we'll give this maybe another minute or so to make sure everyone gets the chance. Just to point out as well, as we go through, if you think of any questions that you'd like to ask me, feel free to pop them in the chat. I won't look at the chat until the end of the talk, but if you want to get your question down, pop it in the chat, and there'll be an opportunity to simply ask at the end as well. I'll be happy to.
Sorry to interrupt. It looks like with the poll they've got to answer both questions before they can actually submit their responses. So, okay. I don't know if you can look at the two collectively, or if they or if comes a bit later.
Well, I suppose the options probably give the idea of what's going on with question 2. But while that poll is still ongoing, then let's just go to question 2. And of course, well, pretty much what it says on the tin here. We've got which one do you think is more painful? We've got A, we've got a nail going through a person's boot. We can see there, and in the second picture, we've got an X-ray of somebody's skull showing a nail inside their head. And which do you think is more painful? Okay. So we've got 37 out of 50 now. We're really 41. We're really speeding through now. And that's 45 out of 50. So we're almost done. Just a few more seconds. Just don't want anyone to miss out who's desperate to put their answer in. 47 now. Apologies if these pictures are a little bit more grim than perhaps what you're used to looking at. And that's everyone voted now. Excellent. Thank you so much, everyone. I'm just going to make a quick note of what people tended to put, and then we shall move on. And we will show you how you've all answered as well. So if I'm going to click on end polling, which I think I could do here, Andy, and I will share the results for a moment. Okay, so everyone should be able to see the answers now. So a large majority for the first question went with all have different pain, 80% of you, or 41 of you. A couple of folks thought all the same pain. A couple went for pain decreased with increased age, and a few went for pain increased with increased age. So there's a variety of answers, with the majority all thinking all have different pain. And with the second one, the nail through boot was just a little bit larger than nail in head. Okay, so I'm not going to let you know what is the right answer, inverted commas, yet, because we've got a couple of things to look at first. So really, we're starting to address the title here. We're thinking, well, what is pain? Well, it's not an easy question in actual fact to answer, but one perhaps more straightforward way to answer that question is to lean on the definition. And we've got the International Association for Study of Pain, who did create a definition of pain back in the 70s, but it was just very recently revised last year. So if you have I'm just going to have a little look at this definition, and you'll notice there's a couple of words there I've indicated in italics. So the italics are my own. So they define pain as an unpleasant sensory and emotional experience. And you think, okay, I think most of us can readily buy into that definition. It's sensory as in we've experienced feeling something, but we also emotionally react to that event. Okay, but associated with or resembling that, associated with actual or potential tissue damage. Okay, so that's an important thing for us to first of all start to get our heads around, and we'll look at a little bit of neuroscience to get our heads around this. But actual or potential tissue damage. So this is suggesting it's accepted at an international level that somebody may have pain, or it would appear that they have pain in the absence of tissue damage, even though it's normally associated with actual tissue damage. Okay, so we'll revisit that when we have a look at those two pictures again. Okay, if I draw your attention now to the it's a bit of a schematic of the nervous system here, and just to orientate those of you who are not particularly knowledgeable about anatomy and physiology. So we've got the brain at the top, and there's a couple of things labeled there, but the main one labels the thalamus. So when I'm talking about the thalamus, that's part of the brain. And as we move down, we've got a section of spinal cord, and then to the left of that, just below the word stimulus, we have, if you like, a tissue. And if you imagine that as somebody's hand, and the stimulus is the classic of somebody hurting themselves is doing DIY. So if that's a hand, the stimulus might be, a hammer, rather missing the nail and hitting the person's finger instead. So that's one example of a stimulus. There's a whole variety of stimuli, as I'm sure you know, that can give rise to pain. That'll be an example of a mechanical stimulus. It might be a heat stimulus. If you touch a really hot cooker ring, you would say that although that's heat, it's very much painful as well. So some sort of stimulus that is causing actual or potential tissue damage. Yeah, actual or potential tissue damage. There'll be a release of some chemicals, and some of them are listed below. We don't need to worry too much about those specific names. Prostaglandins, histamine. You might have heard of histamine in the context of taking antihistamines, and it's histamine, the very same chemical, histamine, that's implicated in symptoms of hay fever and such like, because it's an inflammatory chemical. Anyway, so we've got some chemicals released in the tissues in response to this stimulus. And these chemicals will stimulate what we call nociceptors. Okay, so this is the sort of brownie colored neuron or nerve cell, which is extending from the hand, the tissue here, to the back of the spinal cord. And that's what I'm referring to here, are the A delta and C fibers as indicated on your screen. And you just need to take it for now that A delta and C fibers are nociceptive fibers, or fibers that transmit nociception. Now notice I'm not using the word pain here, I'm using the word nociception, because although we sometimes, even myself, might call this a pain pathway, and you might hear in other sources of information about these being pain fibers, but technically it's nociception is what we call the signal at this point. So the stimulus that's caused the release of these chemicals is allow this nociceptive signal to transfer through this nociceptor into, or this nerve cell, into the spinal cord. It then meets up with another neuron. It's the grey one I'm interested in this moment now. And notice the grey one will cross to the other side of the spinal cord and then travel up into the person's brain. And it travels up to the thalamus, which I mentioned before. So it's a brain structure that acts like a bit of a relay station. So lots of information goes into the thalamus from the body, and the thalamus then will have a neuron from there that will transmit that information to the other parts of the brain, and as indicated by the arrows at the top. So the last neuron then that goes from the thalamus into, will go to the corresponding, an area of brain that corresponds to the tissue that is injured or thought to be injured. Perhaps there'll be an area in the brain that's particular to the hand, an area in the brain that's particular to the foot. We think about, one of the pictures we looked at, and the hand, of course, that's being injured by the window. So there's 3 nerve cells, or 3 neurons. There's the first one from the tissue going into the spinal cord, one from that spinal cord area that travels to the other side of the spinal cord up to the thalamus, and a third neuron that transmits to an area of the brain. We've got a 3 neuron pathway. So what happens then? This nociceptive signal is now up in the brain. This is now where things get interesting, because not everybody's brain is the same, is it? We might say that there's something about a nociceptive signal that's probably fairly similar between all people. But at least once it gets to the brain, things get interesting, because the signal isn't just a direct translation of brain saying, oh, hand has been hit, and it's been hit by this amount of force and in that position, so therefore we must experience this level of pain. There's integration of information going on in the brain. So it's one of the things that we will do, or our brain will do, is to try and make sense of what is happening. What just happened? Are we in danger? Are we under threat? What has just happened will be compared to prior experience. So memory plays a function, and therefore the experiences that person has had in their life will contribute towards their interpretation of that nociceptive signal, to give but one example. Okay, and that is then perhaps what we would more reasonably now call pain, is that experience, that interpretation, making sense of that nociception within the brain. Now, another interesting thing is going to be happening what I've been talking about so far is an ascending pathway, so that we tend to say ascending if a signal's going up towards the brain. But there are also signals, of course, that come from the brain down. And what is going to happen here, we've got the descending pathway appears here in green. And this is where things, like I say, get interesting again, because they synapse or join in with what's going on with these nerves in the spinal cord. And what they can actually do is deliver a pain-killing mechanism. They can actually tend to switch off or get the second order neuron, the grey one, to start to, if you like, ignore the signal coming in through the first neuron, which is that first nociceptor from the area of tissue injury, and can also release a chemical. And one of the chemicals they release are called endorphins or enkephalins. Also very closely related to are called opioids. Many of you have maybe heard about opioid drugs or have perhaps taken opioid drugs in the past. But it's a fascinating thing to know that we have an inbuilt pain-killing system in our nervous systems, and that's facilitated by that descending pathway. There seems to be various things that might influence that, but as I alluded to before, you might have two people who have been hit themselves in the hand with a hammer, but depending on how that person makes sense of what has just happened within their brain based on prior experience, based on fear of what that injury is going to mean for their future life, may have an influencing effect on that descending pathway. In other words, the way they think about their pain might help to decrease the pain or might help to increase it. I think I've said enough about this nerve pathway stuff. So let's go back to, last thing I'll say, if there's anything on that picture I haven't referred to you want to ask me about, feel free to do so, but I'm missing out things that aren't central to the message just now. Okay, let's go back to our picture. So we had these four individuals all experience the same tissue injury, and if I just look at my notes about how people answered, I'm actually very interested to see how people did answer. So there was a couple of folk went for everybody having the same pain, perhaps thinking, you know, pretty logically, we've all experienced the same tissue injury, and thinking about the old-fashioned Descartes approach. So Descartes, when he wrote about pain, I think something like 500 years ago, his idea would have very much, I think, translated into the idea that all four have the same injury, therefore same pain. You probably gathered, though, from what I've been talking about a few moments ago, that that's not correct, because everyone's brain is going to be interpreting what we all know now to be a nociceptive signal. So this Windows crashed down, given a tissue injury. The tissue injury has released some inflammatory chemicals, sending a nociceptive signal into the spinal cord up into the brain. But until it reaches the brain, really, that's nociception that they're all experiencing, whereas the pain is in the brain. It's how they interpret what just happened. Now, then there's a little bit of controversy as to people's pain thresholds, if you like, when it comes to age or gender. There's sometimes some arguments about women having a higher pain threshold, men having a higher pain threshold, and I'm not going to get into that debate right now unless anybody asks about it, but nobody went for that answer anyway. But in terms of age, again, it's possible that certainly some people, as they get older, their ability to feel pain can become impaired. But of course, when they do feel pain, it's still about how they've interpreted what happened. So it's not, while pain threshold is probably a tendency to rise with age, what you actually experience as pain is still not age specific. So it was actually a really fantastic to see most of you. And I don't know who you are, so maybe many of you have studied pain before, but yes, they're all going to be experiencing different pain. And I think we've made that point. Why? But just to look at this picture again, if you can try and interpret what's going on from their faces, the guy's looking quite angry. So why is he angry about what's happened? Now, he maybe just, bought a new window and he's feeling pretty, like he's been diddled because it's broken already, and that's making him pretty angry. So on top of having the pain, the actual tissue injury, you're thinking, wait till I see that window fitter, I'm going to throttle him. And so if you're feeling angry, that's going to have a bearing on your pain experience. The lady with the blue top, she's trying to be quite stoical and trying to not quite pretend the pain isn't happening, but trying to control it, trying to subdue it perhaps. And maybe as a result, her pain level as she's experiencing might be slightly less than the chap who's very angry. The lady wearing the green dress is actually looking like she's maybe starting to faint. And we know when a pain experience becomes such a shock that some people can faint. And then the last is the girl who's crying, and of course it's not untypical for a child when they hurt themselves to cry, which is part of the pain experience, but also social signaling to adults that they need some help. So just to sum some of that up in some words then, that pain is a subjective experience. And when I said pain is in the brain, it's in the brain of the individual. And that's what makes it an individual subjective experience. In most cases of pain, and I'm talking about acute pains that are acute, this type of acute tissue injury related pain might reasonably thought of as the brain's interpretation of nociception. Okay. And then I'm cognizant of time now. I've been talking more than perhaps I thought I would, so I'm not going to dwell too long on this last bit before we get the chance for you to ask your questions. So again, we had a picture at the top, the nail through the boot, and then one with the nail inside the person's head. And again, you're actually an especially smart audience, or you know a little bit more than you know some of this background information. Because interestingly, you can't tell. Hopefully that's obvious. You cannot tell who is in more pain just from these two pictures, if nothing else from everything else we've just talked about. Because I haven't told you anything else about what happened to these two individuals. But briefly, the first individual was a construction worker who jumped down from one level to another and landed on this nail, which went straight through his boot, and he was in absolute agony. It was the worst pain of his life. He was writhing all over the place. The paramedics were called out to retrieve him. Had a terrible time getting him in the ambulance, having to give him gas and air and morphine, really strong painkillers. When they got him to A&E, they had a terrible trouble getting his pain under sufficient control to get the boot off his foot. But when they did, lo and behold, the nail had actually not penetrated his foot. It had gone between the webbing of his toes. So it was absolutely zero tissue injury. Yet this guy had the most intense, worst pain experience of his life. The picture below that with the nail is inside the person's head, there is tissue injury. This is an individual who was also a construction worker who accidentally shot himself with a nail gun. So he was holding the nail gun, obviously it fired the nail, and he thought it had whizzed past his ear. So didn't really think too much of it at the time. Noticed he was maybe getting a little bit of a headache, but not much, and just continued to finish his working day and then went home. Next day, I've got a bit of toothache. So he booked in to see his dentist, and his dentist took the x-ray and then found the source of his toothache. So we're talking about a real, if you like, actual tissue injury where a nail's inside the person's head, and he shrugs it off as very little more than toothache, because that was the story that made sense to him. So the nociceptive signal that's gone to his brain associated with that tissue injury is being interpreted as, made sense of as toothache. So it's not too painful, I'll go and see the dentist in the morning. Whereas the other person who had no tissue injury, but his brain interpreted that he had been under threat, that his body in his physical sense was under threat. And he could look down and he saw he saw a nail through his foot. He was convinced that it was through his foot, and he had a pain experience commensurate with what he believed had happened to him. So that was the set really to bring home the second message, that hurt does not always equal harm. But it doesn't mean the pain isn't real. It doesn't mean the pain was just in his head. All pain is in your head, because all pain is generated via the brain, but it's real. And last thing to finish up, why would I or any other nurses be interested in pain? Well, I put up this literature review that I published, I think last year, with a final year student in the nursing program, because we were really interested in this area, because many of our patients have pain. And disappointingly, the evidence was still suggesting that nurses consistently I'm muted. Oh, okay. I had a message come up on my screen saying I had to unmute. Maybe that was for everyone else. I think it was for everyone else. So I'm just finishing up for the Q&A. So why should nurses consistently underestimate how much pain someone is? It's because pain's complicated, and that was perhaps a third point I hope to impress on you today as well, that it's not straightforward. When we look at someone, we can't always obviously see the reason that they're in pain and what's going on, and it requires a really thorough, detailed assessment. So anyway, it's an area of research interest for any nurses or any other healthcare professionals, because this isn't just about nurses, it's across the health professions. There's a tendency to underestimate patients' pain, and we need to get better at it. And so there's research opportunities to look at why this is happening and how to make the pain management better for patients. Anyway, I think I've said enough. So we'll hand over now, so we've got plenty of time for a Q&A.